Welcome everyone. My name is Richard Orme, and I'm delighted to have you join us today for another webinar hosted by the DAISY Consortium. The DAISY Consortium is the not-for-profit global authority on publishing and reading for people with blindness, low vision, and other print disabilities. Over more than 2 decades, our team of international experts have developed standards, tools, and best practices that are relied on by publishers and library services, vendors, and technology companies. And as more and more publishers are implementing inclusive practices, not least due to the forthcoming EAA for the European market and Title II regulations in the US, we're bringing you webinars and website resources to help you prepare. Today, we're excited to be taking an insider's look at InDesign's accessibility improvements, when I'll be joined by the driving forces behind InDesign's EPUB enhancements. Over the next 30 minutes or so, I'll talk with Rob Haverty, Gregorio Pellegrino, Laura Brady, and Jonas Lilquist, and you'll get a practical guide to the latest features. You'll learn how they empower you to build better, more inclusive EPUBs, and you'll get a sneak peek at future priorities, and we'll have some time for Q&A. If you're serious about inclusive design, there'll be something for you in this webinar, whether you're a veteran InDesign user or a casual EPUB creator. Okay, let's get started. So, people with disabilities face barriers to reading and education if information is published in a way that doesn't work for them. And at the same time, publishers want to reach all potential readers, and they need to comply with accessibility regulations. Over the last decade, we've seen wonderful progress in the accessibility of digital books, ensuring they can be read by people with blindness, low vision, and other print disabilities. Because of the foundational work of DAISY and W3C, standards and best practices are clear. There are tools to validate the ebook files and check for accessibility. We also have ebook apps and devices with accessibility features that people with print disabilities rely on. But publishers also need effective tools to create ebooks that are standards compliant and meet with accessibility good practice. In this way, they can build those good practices into their regular workflow, so it becomes part of everyday practice with the familiar tools they already know. InDesign has offered an EPUB export feature for many years, but you had to do work in the code to fix it up afterwards, correcting errors or adding support for missing features. So people who were fans of both InDesign and accessible ebooks asked for features to be added and bugs to be fixed. But it was hard to get the attention of the decision makers at Adobe. And with accessibility increasingly being part of contract language, with the EAA coming and accessibility legislation in other parts of the world too, this was becoming increasingly urgent. How could all these publishers produce accessible ebooks if the leading software didn't provide the wherewithal? Well, this concern found its way to the Accessible Book Consortium, an initiative of the UN agency WIPO, and to the Federation of European Publishers. Both organizations reached out to the Adobe CEO, Shantanu Narayan, in early 2022, who responded rapidly, positively, and tasked his teams to prioritize the issue. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Rob Haverty from Adobe. So, Rob, tell us about yourself and your role.
Absolutely. Thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here. And it has been a pleasure to have this partnership that we have had. Um, I am on the corporate accessibility team, which actually sits under our ethical innovation team, led by our senior director, Grace Yee. And in my role, I manage the team of product managers that work directly with our product teams to help them address accessibility, both in our document cloud products like Acrobat and our creative cloud products like InDesign.
And Rob, tell us about Adobe's approach to accessibility.
Absolutely. Um, Adobe has been committed to accessibility for a long time. And in that commitment, probably one of the most important parts is our partnership with people with disabilities and our customers. And we want to make sure that we are addressing the needs in a timely manner, both through our own testing and identifying those issues, as well as when issues are brought to us by our customers.
Okay, so Adobe's InDesign is a leading desktop publishing tool, very widely used in the publishing industry and a big role to play in accessible ebooks. Tell us about the accessibility in InDesign.
Yes, absolutely. So within InDesign, our original focus was on PDF documents, and that was primarily because PDF documents are quite ubiquitous worldwide. There are trillions of them created every year. Um, but through our partnership and through the Accessible Book Consortium and the Federation of European Publishers reaching out to us, we recognized that there was a gap in providing publishers the ability to create accessible EPUB books.
Well, InDesign's offered an EPUB feature for many years, but you had to do a ton of work in the code to fix it up afterwards, correcting errors or adding support for missing features. So, how do we go about moving the needle on that?
Quite frankly, it really has been driven by the Accessible Book Consortium and the Federation of European Publishers. And really, this has also been driven a bit around the European Accessibility Act. So you all actually came to us with a list of issues that we needed to address. And we looked at them from two aspects. One is how can we improve creating accessible EPUB formats for publishers? And then how can we also improve the output so that it is easier for people with disabilities to consume the information in those books?
Thanks for that, Rob. And thank you for your partnership. And a shout out to your engineering colleagues in the InDesign team for their work on this initiative. A reminder that if you have questions for Rob or any of our speakers, please use the Q&A button in Zoom and we'll get to these in the Q&A session. So the letter from ABC included the phrase, "Our experts would be pleased to provide suggestions for InDesign enhancements." So we needed some experts. We collected a brains trust of ebook production experts from Canada, France, Kenya, Italy, India, the UK, and the US. And we developed a closely documented list of more than 30 issues to discuss and prioritize with the Adobe team. So that's the background to this initiative. And from here, I'll hand over to Gregorio to pick up the story as we move into the technical details.
Thanks, Richard and Rob, for this introduction. As the technical leader of the Accessible EPUB from InDesign Expert Group, it's my pleasure to introduce our dedicated team of international accessibility specialists. Our expert group is composed of Richard Horn from DAISY Consortium, who facilitates our work, and you have already met him, Laura Brady, representing the Accessible Books Consortium, Jonas Lilquist from Cilia, and myself, representing Fondazione Lia. Over the past 3 years, we have worked closely with Adobe engineering team to improve how InDesign exports accessible EPUBs by providing them with a detailed list of technical requirements and ongoing support. These recommendations are based on our deep hands-on expertise in using InDesign to create accessible publications and are aimed at making the creation of born accessible EPUBs from InDesign much easier. Today, each member of our team will present a different aspect of the work we have accomplished. One aspect of our work that I'm particularly proud of is that our efforts are beneficial not just for publishers specifically focused on accessibility, but for the entire publishing ecosystem. Another significant achievement is the dramatic reduction in the manual post-export code editing to the HTML, CSS, and XML that was previously required to create accessible EPUBs after the export from InDesign. These two steps represent a significant step forward in our mission to make digital publishing accessible by default, right since the beginning, and be fully integrated into mainstream publishing workflows. Now, I'll hand over to my colleagues who will walk you through specific aspects of the improvements we've helped implement. Thank you all for joining us today.
Okay, so I want to talk about how to create a page list from InDesign. InDesign is now capable of creating a page list out of the box that needs almost no attention or remediation from developers. This is a major upgrade over how EPUBs were created from InDesign even from about a year ago. A page list is a literal list of all the print pages in a document with links to the location of the page breaks in the navigation document. And this navigation document is often called the toc.xhtml in an InDesign exported EPUB. The page breaks in the file must be marked with a specific HTML markup and then a list gathered together as a list in the navigation. There's a good technical explainer on the DAISY knowledge base, and the link will be on your screen. Reading systems will use the page list in a variety of ways, the most important of which is to sync page locations to the print edition so that users of various formats can literally be on the same page. Including a page list in a digital publication is a key part of an accessible ebook. So InDesign has been creating a page list for fixed layout publications for some time, and it's now capable of doing so for reflowable ebooks as well, which is a massive improvement for ebook developers. Up until now, we've been using scripts from InDesign and then post-export scripts. We've been basically standing on our head to get a good page list out of InDesign. It is now simple and seamless and quite easy. So there are three parts to creating a page list, which InDesign now fully supports. So it marks the page break in the file, in the HTML file, the exact location with the correct markup. It includes a list in the navigation document, and there's a place to identify the source of the pagination. So the first two are achieved automatically when a user opts for page navigation from the EPUB export wizard. InDesign will automatically include the correct HTML with ARIA to mark the page breaks and will assemble a list of the pages in the navigation document. The last item about the source of the pagination may require a bit more attention. So on the General tab of the EPUB export wizard, as you can see on the screenshot on your screen, the page navigation button will be checked by default. The decision you need to make is whether to add a print identifier, that is, a print ISBN, as you export the book. Not including this print corollary identifier will earn you an error in ACE by DAISY, so do consider including it. If the ebook is digital first or digital only, you can opt for none in that same window or point to another non-ISBN source. So one other quick note. One concern for InDesign users is to maintain the page breaks as they get a publication ready for export to EPUB. This isn't always as straightforward or easy, especially for content that needs a lot of items like images, sidebars, and marginalia anchored. Often, ebook developers will anchor those kind of floating elements to the location in the text where they want them to appear. And anchoring up until now has been a bit of a glitchy process because it often causes text to flow behind the image. Which is not good for print purposes. For digital, it doesn't matter as much, but that text flowing behind the image means that the location of your page break is going to be slightly off. The anchoring process is seamless with an important note. Be cautious to anchor to a paragraph above the anchored item. Doing so will prevent reflow, which will then maintain the integrity of the page list. The page break markers should be faithful to where the page breaks occur in print. So in an image, so in the screenshot, you can see that there's The image is anchored to the title above it, then there's no reflow. When that same image is anchored to the paragraph beside it, the layout changes slightly and the exact location of the page break marker will shift. So to avoid this, be really deliberate about where you anchor those kinds of elements. Hope that makes sense.
Tables are one of the high priority issues we started working on last year. Tables differ from ordinary linear text. They are read row by row or column by column, both visually and with screen readers. Column and row headers give essential context for understanding the data. Screen reader users can't visually scan the table to match headers with data. They rely on proper HTML markup for understanding and navigating the table. Before the recent updates, 3 key features of accessible table markup were missing from InDesign's EPUB export. First, column headers. In HTML, th scope equals col. Next, row headers. Th scope equals row. And finally, table titles, the caption element. In InDesign version 20, released in October 2024, support for column headers was introduced. This builds on InDesign's existing feature for setting header rows in tables. Now, any non-empty cell in a header row is exported with column header markup, including the scope attribute. Note that this improvement only applies to reflowable EPUB. InDesign's fixed layout export still doesn't support table markup at all. This slide shows the current status of table markup support for reflowable EPUB. It shows a table fragment with 3 rows and 4 columns. The table has a title or main header, Provinces of Canada. This would be a caption element within the table. Unfortunately, InDesign does not support this. The first row of the table contains headers for the data columns. Column headers are now supported, which is a big improvement. The leftmost column contains headers for the rows. Row headers are still not supported. The remaining cells are data cells, which are, of course, supported. Let's wrap up by summarizing the situation. Content creators can and should use InDesign's feature for setting header rows. This ensures proper column header markup directly upon export. For all but the simplest tables, some manual editing or post-processing is still required. This applies to row headers, which are important for accessibility, captions, which are helpful but less critical, and also to column headers that are not in the topmost rows of the table. Support for row headers and captions is a high priority for the expert group. Unfortunately, there's no timeline yet for when they might be addressed. Now I'll talk about how InDesign handles footnotes and endnotes when exporting to EPUB. First, a bit of background. An InDesign document can include footnotes, endnotes, or both. When exporting to reflowable EPUB, there are 3 options for footnotes. One of these options converts footnotes into endnotes. Each export option affects the HTML markup and the placement of the note text within the EPUB file. eBook users must be able to move from the note reference to the note text and back to their reading position. Functional links and backlinks are essential for this. For screen reader users, it's also important to identify note references and have the option to skip note content. Digital publishing ARIA roles address these needs. They also enable special handling of notes, such as pop-up display in reading apps. So let's look at how InDesign has improved its note export. In 2024, significant updates were made. By the end of the year, all major problems were solved. The updates focused on 3 areas. First, note reference links and backlinks. Second, HTML markup for note content. Third, the use of digital publishing ARIA roles. These improvements make note handling in EPUBs more reliable and accessible. Next, let's look at the improvements to links and HTML markup for notes. Links and backlinks. InDesign now generates functional reference links and backlinks for all export options. HTML markup. Footnotes are wrapped in aside elements, while endnotes are structured as ordered lists within a section. Finally, let's look at how InDesign now uses digital publishing ARIA roles for notes. Previously, ARIA roles weren't applied to note elements at all. Now InDesign adds these attributes to make notes more accessible. These include doc note ref for note reference links, doc backlink for backlinks, doc footnote for footnote text, and doc endnotes for the endnote section. The corresponding EPUB type attributes are also added. This ensures better compatibility with reading apps.
Another important feature we designed with the InDesign team was the new accessibility panel within the InDesign export mask under the metadata tab. This panel allows content creators to directly enter the publication's accessibility metadata. And this is a significant step forward, considering that accessibility metadata is a strong requirement of the EPUB Accessibility 1.1 specification, as well of the European Accessibility Act. Within this panel, you are able to set the accessibility feature. There is a long list where you can select different elements like alternative text, index, page break markers, page navigation, reading order. The accessibility others, in most cases, is known. The access mode, like visual and textual. Access mode sufficient, textual. The accessibility summary, which is an optional field, not mandatory. The accessibility credentials, where you can set the conformance, the standard you try to conform to, like EPUB Accessibility 1.1, WCAG 2.1 level AA. If there is a certifier of the accessibility of the book, like Fondazione Lia, if there are some certifier credentials, if any, and eventually a link, so a URL to the certifier report. However, it is important to understand the accessibility metadata are specific things for professionals. And this panel is not pre-filled and requires a deep understanding of the accessibility characteristics of the publication. These characteristics have to be described by the accessibility metadata to ensure the accuracy of the information entered. In this sense, I want to warn you, because in Fondazione Lia, as part of our quality assurance activities for ebooks, we check a lot of publications, and we often face situations where the accessibility metadata do not reflect the reality of the content, so misleading the end user. For example, we see novels claiming that there are accessible formulas in MathML in the content, but there are no formulas at all in the novel. So you need to be careful not to provide users with incorrect information about the book accessibility. Two important new features of InDesign for making accessible EPUBs were related to images. The first one is about alt text for cover images. InDesign was capable of adding alt text to images within the content, but it was not possible to produce an EPUB with an alt text for the cover image, ending up with an EPUB with just cover.png as an alt text of the cover image, which is not meaningful for the end user. Acknowledging this, we help InDesign to introduce a feature allowing the content creator to specify the alternative text of the cover images directly within the EPUB export wizard. During the export process, the content creator can now input a descriptive alt text for the cover image, for sure if the ebook has one. We also provided a placeholder to help the content creator to make that alt text properly, and the placeholder tells cover of, and then the title of the ebook by the author. And if the metadata are already filled in for the ebook, then the cover alt text is automatically generated. The other feature is about decorative images. Decorative images are elements within digital content that serve no informational purpose. They are purely aesthetic. For users of screen readers, encountering these images without the proper tagging can lead to confusion. Users might wonder if they are missing out on important content, which detracts from the overall experience. Recognizing this, we help Adobe to add the possibility to mark specific images as decorative. It was already possible for accessible PDFs, but there was not the option for EPUBs. Now in InDesign, in the Object Export Options dialog, you can find the option Decorative Image, No Alt Text. Marking up an image with this option allows you to tag that as decorative. And so the output in EPUB gets you the image with the attribute role presentation and the alt attribute empty. That means that that specific image was intentionally tagged as decorative, which is different from just having the alt attribute empty, because that may be a mistake, because you may forgot to put the alt text there, while properly tagging decorative images allows content creator to specifically say that that image is a decorative image.
Okay, let's talk about drop caps now. Drop caps have long been a fairly tricky part of creating ebooks. Many print layouts use drop caps as a visual element at the start of a new chapter or section to denote a scene or a context shift. They are a purely decorative element that up until now InDesign has been exporting in a span with CSS to create the drop cap. This looks accurate, but as we often know in ebook land, especially when we're centering accessibility, something that looks right isn't necessarily right under the hood. So it has been troublesome for accessibility reasons as it's read by a screen reader as two separate words. The word the, for example, can get interpreted as he by screen readers or assistive technologies. So you'll find a technical explainer of the issues on the DAISY knowledge base in the link on your screen. InDesign is now exporting a more sophisticated HTML CSS combination known as the first letter pseudo element. The HTML has no spans in it, so there's nothing that's going to go pear-shaped with assistive technology, and you can see the HTML on your screen now. The drop cap is created purely by CSS, which in this case is defined as a left float letter set at 4.179 ems and with a font shift. This approach works beautifully across the device spectrum and functions without issues for assistive technologies. And you can see how this renders in this screenshot from Apple Books. One quick note about how InDesign is exporting drop caps. If your print layout has drop caps that use more than one letter, things get a little bit more complicated. And InDesign will then default to using a span for that 2-letter string, so it's just best to be aware of that.
Now let's take a look at how InDesign handles SVG. SVG is a powerful format for graphics in EPUB because it's both scalable and lightweight. It's an XML-based vector format that supports text rendered with fonts. SVG images can be scaled up without losing quality, which is important for low vision users. InDesign has supported placing SVG images since version 15, released in 2019. By default, when exporting to EPUB, InDesign converts SVGs to PNG. To keep SVGs intact in reflowable EPUB, we need to adjust the export settings. There are currently 2 export options for SVG. The first is embed code, which means the SVG code is embedded directly into the HTML content. The second is object tags, which means the SVG is kept as a separate file and referenced using an HTML object tag. When exporting SVGs from InDesign using these 2 options, there are some limitations. Firstly, any alt text added in InDesign is not exported. Also, marking the image as decorative has no effect. On the other hand, when SVGs are converted to PNG during export, InDesign does preserve the alt text, but this comes at the cost of losing the scalability benefits of SVG. In the upcoming version 20.4, expected in early June, InDesign will introduce a new export option for SVG, image tags. When this option is selected, InDesign will use a standard IMG tag to reference the SVG file. This has 2 main benefits. It supports the alt attribute, allowing alt text to be exported. It also ensures that marking an image as decorative works correctly, but the default export behavior, converting SVGs to PNG, will not change. Now let's see where to find this setting in InDesign. You can apply it to a single SVG image or to all images in your publication at once. To apply it to a single image, first select the image on the page. Next, go to Object in the top menu and choose Object Export Options to open the settings window. There, make sure to select Use Existing Image for graphic objects. This will activate the Use SVG As drop-down menu. From there, select Image Tags, which is the 3rd option in the list. To apply this setting to all images at once, start by exporting your document to reflowable EPUB. In the Reflowable Layout Export Options window, go to the Object tab. At the top, uncheck Preserve Appearance from Layout for graphic and media objects. From the Use SVG As drop-down, choose Image Tags. By applying this setting, all SVG images in your EPUB will use the new Image Tags option.
Well, thank you, Rob, and your engineering colleagues at Adobe for the improvements that you've made. And thanks in anticipation for the enhancements that you'll be making in the coming months. We still have a way to go, so don't think we're done yet. And thanks to Laura, Jonas, and our technical lead, Gregorio, for telling us about some of those latest enhancements. I mentioned before that we had an international brains trust work up the list of 30 issues, but over the last 2 years, we've been relying on a core team, Gregorio, Laura, and Jonas, who've been working diligently with the Adobe engineers, providing clarity on issues, helping with prioritization, providing code samples, testing pre-releases, and validating fixes. That's a huge contribution from our expert group and the organizations they work for, Fondazione LIA, eBound Canada, and Celia, freely giving hundreds of hours to help other InDesign users produce better EPUB. Your work is excellent and impactful. Thank you. Okay, we'll move now into the Q&A section of the webinar. So if you have questions for Rob, Gregorio, Laura, or Jonas, you can use the Q&A button in Zoom, and I see some of you have already submitted questions. We'll cover as many as possible. Rob, coming to you first. So this webinar has provided information on the issues that have been addressed so far. There are still issues in the issue tracker. What comes next?
Thank you, Richard. And before I answer that, I do want to just second your comment about the help from Gregorio, Laura, and Jonas, and yourself. Quite frankly, InDesign would not be where it is today with EPUB without all of you partnering with us so well. What comes next is actually continuing the work that we've been doing. We started with what we considered the blocking issues, which was prioritized, through the help of all of you. And now we have a second set of issues that are equally important, but at least are not blocking, from creating accessible EPUB books. And so this team has prioritized these, and the engineering team at Adobe is starting to work on those. And the process will continue, where we'll just continue to iterate on this over the next 12 months as we finish up the work.
Great. Thank you for that, Rob. And the second question to you, GL asks, if we have paid attention to accessibility in working in InDesign, will the exported EPUB have all the accessibility aspects in the exported code?
I think the simple answer to that is not yet. We have done a lot of work, but as Richard has mentioned, I believe we started with 33 issues and we have tackled 15 of them. So we still have some more issues to go and to get to where we really want to be. However, I will just add, I've been doing accessibility for decades now, and quite frankly, it is a continuing journey. We are never 100% there. There is always more work to do. And so, having the partnership that we do with all of you and with the rest of our customers is just going to help us continue to make it better.
Great. Thank you. One more question before I turn to Laura. Jim Swift asks, Jim had heard news that alt text creation will be added to InDesign. Is this still in the task list? Is there an ETA?
So yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not actually 100% sure what the question is. Gregorio did talk quite a bit about alt text, being added for the cover page. Alt text itself has been in there for quite a while. But if you're asking about AI generated alt text, that is something that Adobe is working very vigorously on across really all of our products. The accessibility team that I'm part of is actually part of the ethical innovation team, which includes our AI ethics team. And so when we start thinking about AI doing anything, we're always thinking about it from an ethical standpoint, and we want to make sure that what it is generating is going to not be offensive, and stick with our ethics values. But I would say stay tuned. I don't have a firm ETA yet. AI is getting more and more robust. And we're actually starting to get to the point where not just describing the image, but actually being able to understand the image in the context in which it's been used and being able to actually create real alt text.
Great. Thanks for the question, Jim. Laura, turning to you, we have a question from Hadley. It's a clarification question. So you mentioned to anchor any graphics above the paragraph that you'd like them to be anchored to rather than besides. Could you provide that clarification? You'll see the question in the Q&A.
Yeah. And that's right, Hadley. What I suspect is as you get used to how this works, there'll be a little bit of trial and error as you sort of figure it out, but play with it and see what's working. It will be visually clear right away if there's going to be reflow on the page or not. But if you link it to something above rather than next to, you should be safe. But you'll have to play with it just a little bit to make sure it's working as expected.
Thank you, Laura. We'll keep the pace up. Another one for you is what about EPUB 2? So we've talked about changes that are fixing up EPUB 3, but maybe some things about EPUB 2 got affected. Are there plans to address them? Is the question I have here.
Yeah, so EPUB 2, because of some of the changes that we've made to how InDesign exports EPUB 3, making it more HTML5 based, EPUB 2 is now broken out of the box. We have logged some bugs with Adobe and hope that this will get fixed in future. If I could maybe make a little plug to just move on to EPUB 3. I know there are a few lingering distributors left in the world who really want EPUB 2, but call them up and yell at them. Or send me their number. I'll do it. I'm not afraid to yell. Move on to EPUB 3 is what I would suggest. And if that's not feasible, changes will be coming. I hope to fix that export soon.
Thank you, Laura. Coming to you now, Jonas. Two questions. One is, do you have any tips for exporting tables from InDesign and at the same time avoiding accessibility issues? So exporting tables from InDesign to EPUB.
Yeah. Well, my first tip would be to make sure from the start that the table is well structured and whenever possible, avoid very large and complex tables. Simple tables are easier for assistive technology to handle, and the markup for simple tables is better supported by InDesign also. So try to avoid complexities like merging data cells, which can be confusing for screen reader users, or dividing a large table into sections with multiple header rows. And as I said, when you use InDesign's feature for defining header rows in tables, you will get good column header markup right upon export, which is great. But you need to watch out for row headers, which are usually found in the leftmost column of the table. They need to be fixed after export. And my last tip would be to avoid fixed layout export for books containing tables, because InDesign's fixed layout export doesn't support semantic table markup at all. So you will get a bunch of spans and divs instead of real tables. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Jonas. I've got another question lined up for Gregorio on fixed layout, but let's stick with you for the moment. So EPUB export, struggling with complex layout elements, maybe images, captions, and text boxes. Do you know of any kind of planned improvements in the works for handling these more complex layouts?
Well, there are several issues that touch upon this subject that the expert group has documented and that we have discussed with Adobe, and I'm quite hopeful that we will see some improvements there. One example is that InDesign doesn't support proper image caption markup using the fig caption element nested within a figure tag. This one has proved to be a bit difficult to solve for the Adobe engineers, so there's no timeline for fixing it. But we're hopeful that it will be addressed in the future. Another challenge that Laura already mentioned was about anchoring images or text boxes, which often causes reflow. That's also an issue that Adobe is looking closely at right now. And finally, when you anchor objects like text boxes, InDesign creates CSS that is quite problematic. Sometimes you may see that the text in an image caption gets clipped and the box doesn't scale when you scale up the text. So that's something we've been looking at closely. And I think once the higher priority issues have been fixed, Adobe will start looking at that more closely too. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Well, Jonas, you mentioned fixed layout, and Marie said, very happy to see the webinar. Great to have the focus on reflowable, but what news on fixed layout EPUBs? So, Gregorio, what news on fixed layout? What are the solutions there?
Thank you for this question. So, as you have understood, we started working on reflowable EPUBs because this is the common format used for most of ebooks that are distributed. And because it's the most accessible format, if it's well done for sure, that allow the end user to change the font size, the line height, the font color. So the end user has all the power to change the formatting. This thing is not possible in fixed layout, as we know. I also want to stress the fact that at the moment, there is no official specification on how to make fixed layout accessible. For sure, they can be made more accessible than the ones that are exported right now by different authoring tools. One of these is InDesign with some limitations on fixed layout, but there is no a golden rule on how to make fixed layout accessible. So it's also tricky to give guidance to a big company that have to develop something that is not trusted by specifications. One thing that I will add on this is that while working on the reflowable part, some of the improvements of the reflowable export were also enabled for fixed layout. For example, the metadata, accessibility metadata part, you can find the same accessibility metadata panel in the fixed layout export. The improvement on the semantic of endnotes and footnotes were inherited by fixed layout as well. We understand that is not enough. We would like to finish our work on reflowable and then start working on fixed layout with InDesign. In the meantime, I can mention that there are some external tools, such as those developed by Circular Software, that can be used in combination with InDesign to export more accessible fixed layout out of InDesign. So look at those tools that may help your daily work.
Great. And again, that was a tool from Circular Software. Thank you for that, Gregorio. Another question for you is, one of the high priority issues in the issue tracker right now is support for MathML. Can you tell us the status of accessibility support for accessible scientific expressions?
Sure. So MathML support in InDesign is quite a new thing. It was released in version 20.0 last October, and it was a great surprise for the whole ecosystem. We were waiting the possibility to manage formulas in InDesign for decades now. We know that is a starting point. Development is not, let's say, completely finished. There are some things that have to be improved, both for the print production and for the digital production. On the EPUB export side, what is exported right now, if you have a MAFML formula in InDesign, is the SVG image of that formula, so a vectorial image, plus the MAFML code hidden behind the image. This is quite accessible, but for sure is not the best option, because the best option would be to have plain MAFML for representing more formulas in fixed layout. So we are working with the InDesign developer teams to allow MAFML export, plain MAFML export directly out of InDesign. And we know that during this year, some improvements should be available in that side. So fully accessible formulas out of InDesign are coming.
Thank you, Gregorio. We have the same question asked by two people here, so maybe two of our panelists might answer on this one. So from Chris and from Sarah, there's the question about support for long descriptions of images or extended descriptions in EPUB. The status of this one, who would like to start on this, or maybe take this question?
Maybe I can say one thing on the specification side and then leave to Laura or Jonas. Laura has some techniques on this. The thing I would like to stress before taking to the techniques is that at the moment, there is no standardized way to make long descriptions. Long descriptions are a concept. It's the idea of having a long description for an image, but it's not like the alt text where you have the alt attribute. There is no standardized markup for those. In the World Wide Web Consortium, we are working on standardizing long descriptions, so then the authoring tools can implement them in a proper way. But for how to manage long description at the moment in InDesign, I can leave to Laura that has some tips.
Yeah, so this is on our agenda, it's on our radar. One thing I would just add to what Gregorio said is that be cautious of overusing long descriptions when they're not really necessary. Be mindful of the reading experience. I would just put that out there. I have experimented with using cross references to create long descriptions, and I wrote about it on my blog. Maybe I'll add a link to the resources document or something like that, just in case it's useful for people. But the best way, and that's assuming linking out to a nonlinear HTML with a long description, and it's sort of the most simple way to do a long description. It has the broadest device support and reading system support for that method. So that's one option.
Sticking with you for a moment, Laura, we have a question. Sorry, I've got so many, I'm scrolling through them. Yeah, from Ignacio. And the question is, are there any recommendations or tips for books or courses for someone who's new and interested in learning how to make EPUB from InDesign that's accessible? Thank you.
It's a great question. And things are changing so fast that there are some things out there in the world, but they're all slightly out of date now because the changes are coming so quickly from the InDesign end. There's in the resources link, there's a link out to the Accessible Publishing Learning Network, which is a whole set of micro lessons on how to create accessible InDesign accessible EPUB out of InDesign. So that may be of use to you, Ignacio. I would encourage you to go look at that resources document and find that APLN link.
Great, thank you for that. I have another question in the queue, but I can't find it right now. It's coming to you, Rob, which is about, so great to see these improvements for EPUB. Do any of these kind of find their way into the PDF world? What's happening with that? So that one for you, Rob.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we actually have spent a number of years now working on making sure that you can export an accessible PDF out of InDesign. But it was very interesting in this process to find that there were things that we had missed still. And in working on EPUB, we also picked up some additional fixes for PDF. But in my experience, creating an accessible PDF out of InDesign is, or I should say it a different way, PDF is the most accessible format that you can create out of InDesign today.
Great. Thank you for that. And that was from Galadzic. I hope I got that name right. Sorry for not finding your name beforehand. So here's a general question, and we're kind of beginning to come towards the end now. So is there maybe a clear explanation for the different accessibility features in that EPUB export? What satisfies each of the options? So this question from Munchke is kind of who says crawling through the technical explanations is rather tedious. This is something we hear. EPUB producers shouldn't have to be coders and developers. They just want to know how to do the right kind of thing. So a clear explanation. Maybe, Laura, it links to the kind of the training and guidance piece.
Yeah, for sure. And just to give a feedback on this, it's not that simple. Also, because the panel is changing. But when we train publishers on how to use InDesign for accessibility, it usually takes me about 1 hour just to explain the export wizard, because there are a lot of options and you really have to understand each option to understand what the output will be and the accessibility implications. So it's not that simple, but maybe we can think about it with InDesign, maybe in their knowledge base to help users.
Great. Thank you. Well, we're coming towards the end. We've got questions here in the queue we just haven't had time for, so we'll share them amongst our expert group and try to respond to the people that ask them. If you want to make better EPUB from InDesign, then we invite you to upgrade your InDesign to the latest version and take advantage of the features that our amazing expert group have explained to you today. And you can stay up to date by signing up for the Inclusive Publishing newsletter at inclusivepublishing.org/newsletter, where our expert group will be posting articles or will be linking to the articles that they post on their own organizations' websites. Okay, so we're coming to the end of our session today. Many thanks once again to Rob, Gregorio, Laura, and Jonas for being excellent guests in this webinar and giving us an insider's look at InDesign's accessibility improvements. So that's it for today. But before we go, I just have time to remind you that in the treasure trove that is the DAISY webinar archive, you'll find more than 50 hours of videos, plus articles and links and resources related to accessible publishing. And the next accessible publishing webinar from DAISY will be on May the 28th, when we'll be looking at AI and accessible publishing. We got some questions on that. Debate about artificial intelligence is everywhere, with new and improved services being launched every week, and the promise of automating tasks and producing higher quality content. But what might these developments mean for accessible publishing? Do they offer practical solutions, or do the costs and risks outweigh the benefits? So join us as our panel of experts discuss their experiences of using AI in accessible publishing in a variety of ways, and how the promise of AI might become a reality. You can find out more information at daisy.org/webinars, where you can also sign up to the webinar announcement mailing list to learn about new topics as we add them. Thank you for coming today. I hope you'll join us again next time. Goodbye.